mental images, mental talk, emotional body sensation. So, in general, if you look from the side, mental images tend to be sort of centered here, but they could be around your surroundings, and they can also be back where your body is. But memory, plan, fantasy tends to sort of be up and in front. Talk tends to be posterior and up. And then the emotional body is primarily down where the body is. So very, very roughly speaking, you've got a triangle like this. It's an oversimplification, but it's a way of thinking about it. This is the center of image space, but image space can be broad. It can be quite wide, actually. So emotional body space is just the space of your body. Some people have emotional centers, places in the body where pleasant or unpleasant emotional sensations would likely be most prominent. Some people don't have emotional centers. If you have emotional centers, then bringing yourself to your emotional body means some awareness strongly in those centers and some awareness peripherally over the whole body. If you don't have emotional centers, then just awareness in your body in general is to be in emotional body space. Talk space is typically ill-defined, but most people sort of point at their ears, their head, this area, it's cephalic. So abstractly and in an oversimplified schematic view, we can think of image space, talk space, emotional body space. Our descriptive word for visual thinking is mental image, but our label is see in. Our descriptive word for auditory thinking is mental talk, but our label is hear in. And our descriptive word for emotional body sensation is emotional body sensation. However, the label is feel in. So whenever I think about this system, I sort of get this image of the triangle. And I also get the phrase that this system is reactive, proactive, interactive, and occasionally inactive. If you get this, you will have such a handle on life. Such a handle on life. Because every heaven and hell that you will experience between now and the moment you die will somehow involve the four things that I just mentioned within this system. It's reactivity, it's proactivity, it's interactivity, and it's occasional inactivity. So let's see what that means. Reactive means if you have external sounds, external sights, and physical body sensation, it could trigger one, two, or all three of these at the same time. So it reacts to the physical senses. Producing what? Well, if that reaction is unconscious and solidified, it produces the sense that there is a self that hears, sees, and is physically contacted. So if you're in pain, and this system is reacting to the pain, judging it, awfulizing it, and having limbic reactions such as fear, tear, irritation, helplessness, and so forth. So that's the self, that's this system reacting to a physical contact, the physical world. So as a reactive system, when it activates and it's not experienced with concentration, clarity, and equanimity, it will convince you that you have a limited self that is seeing, hearing, and in a physical world. So on the other hand, we're not trying to get rid of this activity. It can activate to the max, but as long as there's clarity, concentration, and equanimity, in other words, as long as you have a complete experience of self. And by the way, equanimity is none other than total self-love and total self-acceptance in this regard. So if it reacts and you experience it fully, then you love it to death. It's so active that it's no longer there as a thing. So there's, okay, so that's the reactive system. Every single time you're convinced there's someone inside of you that's a self experiencing an other that is alien and it. At some subtle level, the system is reacting to the physical world. It may be subliminal, below the threshold of awareness. And our job is to clarify it and unblock it and love it. That's the reactive. Proactive. Oh, you've noticed this. It's called monkey mind. When it's not reacting to the outside world, it starts spinning. Memory, plan, fantasy, problem solving. Fantasies, basically two kinds. Fantasies that you run to scare you, and fantasies that you run to entertain you when there's nothing else going on. In neuroscience, this is well known. It's called the default network. Default meaning it's what people fall back on when you don't ask them to attend to something in an experiment. They would tell people, okay, now just rest now. Okay, we're having you like watch that target, that visual target now, do nothing, just rest. And then they discovered they're not resting. There's all this distinctive activation going on by way of default. So what's happening is monkey mind, is memory, plan, fantasy, problem solving, et cetera, et cetera. So I call that the proactive system, meaning that the system will just go off on its own and spin memory, plan, fantasy, convincing you that there's a past, convincing you that there's a future, convincing you of many, many things. So that's the proactive side of the system. Once again, we're not trying to get rid of that. We're trying to have a complete experience of that. Then the system is interactive. That means a mental image could trigger an emotional body sensation. Mental talk could trigger an emotional body sensation. Emotional body sensation could build until you just have to make a comment about it or have a picture of it. A mental image could trigger a comment. A mental talk could make a picture to accompany it. So the arrows point both ways. This is the interactivity of the system. And once you become familiar with the system, you can start to track how this will trigger this, and then this will lead to this, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the interactivity. And becoming clear about this is knowing yourself at a sensory level, at a system theoretic level. This is the system theoretic paradigm for thoughts and emotions. Then the last phrase is occasionally inactive. Actually, more than you might imagine. For brief moments, the system turns off hundreds and hundreds of times during the day. When you just hear, just see, just experience physical touch, for just a second, the system actually evaporates. But people usually don't notice it. So it doesn't help them. They don't realize that the self winks in and out of existence during the day. So when it goes inactive, we have a no-self state, but unless you consciously experience it, it won't be liberating. So we want you to be able to notice when it's active and inactive. So that's the subjective system, and that's what we're going to work on today. I'm going to show you how to work individually and collectively. So if we draw a column, and we're going to use in as an abbreviation for inner arising. We use C to refer to visual experience. It's a verb of visual perception. Here is the verb of auditory perception. Feel is the verb for somatic perception. So see in for mental images, hear in for mental thought, feel in for emotional body sensation. We could work individually, and then we could broadly float. We'll call this focus in within the whole system. So let me say that most people have quite a bit of here in. That's where we're going to start. So we're going to note here in each time the mental talk arises. When the mental talk comes to an end, gone. That's you heard the period at the end of the sentence. And then if there is no mental talk, here rest. Now sometimes people find that by placing the attention in talk space, it sort of like turns off the mental talk. That's not suppression, it just is. It just happens that way. So you'll hear rest. You'll listen to that restful state. Otherwise, hear in, gone. Some people find that after the gone, there'll be a restful state. Some people find that there's immediately a new arising of a next word or phrase or sentence. So that's here in, gone, here rest. That's how we can work individually with this. This is actually pretty straightforward. Mental images and emotional body sensations require a bit of clarification. First and foremost, if you're new to practice, you may not have many mental images. And that's not a problem. You just may not have many of them. So we're going to have you focus on the dark, bright, in front of, behind your closed eyes, which is, you'll recall, is see rest. Focus on that if you don't have any mental images. But if you do have mental images, we'll note that as see in. If all or even part of the mental image drops away or drops off, then gone. You'll note the vanishing of all or part of the image. If you don't have many mental images, then fine, you'll just be see rest until they occur. Remember, however, that if you have memory, plan, or fantasy, you probably are seeing the memory scene, you're probably seeing the fantasy and so forth. We don't call it imagination for nothing. But it may be very vague and fleeting, just a ghostly impression. That's see in. People often think that, oh, mental images, it must be clear like a photograph or like looking at a physical object. Only for some people. The great majority of people, the mental images are these vague, wispy, diaphanous impressions of form that disappear very quickly. And that's see in, that's image. Remember also that if you are aware that you're in any particular place, if you're convinced you're in a room with people at a certain location, you probably get some vague image of your surroundings. That's see in. And when you have body sensations, you probably get a sense of your overall body and your appearance. In addition to the sensations of the body, there's the image of the body. Once again, often rather vague and ill-defined. That's see in also. So that's that. Feel in there's a lot to be said about this. So, at any given instant, somewhere in consciousness, you may experience emotion. The alternative is, at any given instant, you're not experiencing any emotion. If you're not sure, assume you're not experiencing any emotion. Okay, so at any given instant, you may have an experience of emotion. That emotion may be well-defined qualitatively or ill-defined qualitatively. It may be intense or it may be subtle. Quite where that emotion is occurring may be well-defined or it may be ill-defined. However, at any given instant, you either have an emotional experience or you don't. If you're not sure, assume you don't. If you are having an emotional experience, it is possible that part of that emotional experience will involve body sensation, a change in your body. If so, our label for that body sensation is feel in. It is possible that you will have an experience that you'll say is emotional, but it's mental only and does not affect the body. In which case there is no emotional sensation in the body. The emotion is completely mental. That could happen. In that case, when we work with this, and you're having a mental emotion, but there's nothing that impacts in the body, your body, whatever may be happening in your mind, your body is emotionally restful. So we'll call that feel rest. So, if you go to your body and try to figure out which sensations are physical and which are emotional, you may be able to do that, but you probably won't. It will probably just be crazy to try to figure that out. Somewhat depends on the individual. But the way that I set up this category, feel in, is not specifically I'm asking you to go to the body and figure out what's physical in origin and what's emotional in origin. If you can do that, fine, but most people, it's like, it doesn't compute. However, here's something anybody can do. At any given instant, you ask yourself, am I experiencing emotion? Somewhere. Well-defined, ill-defined, okay? Am I experiencing emotion? The answer is yes. Does any part of that experience involve body sensation? The answer will either be yes or no. If you're not sure, the answer is no. If the answer is yes, that's feel in. And that's what to focus on. If the answer is no, then when we're doing this technique, your body is emotionally neutral. And that is a flavor of rest. There are basically 3 flavors of rest that can come up in the body. Physical relaxation, emotional neutrality, and the sense that there are parts of the body that aren't there, or that your body has disappeared. Those are the 3 basic flavors of feel rest. When we do this, if there is no emotion in your body, then feel rest. It is quite common for people to, when they do see in, that they mostly just see rest. It is quite common when people do feel in, that they mostly just feel rest. In other words, these don't activate. This usually activates, but sometimes it doesn't either. Now, are you going to make it a problem that there's nothing but rest within this system? Please don't. Someday it will activate, I promise you. Now, so a common complaint is, well, when I do formal practice, and I try to work with my subjective experience, it's all rest. The system doesn't activate. It goes inactive during formal practice. Or this part might be active, but these other 2 parts aren't. And during formal practice, I can never get the feel or the feel in or the see in going. So I have but then in daily life, of course, it is going, but I don't have the wonderful situation of being in formal practice to work with it. So what should I do? So what is my standard recommendation for this situation?
Do nothing.
Watch TV.
Yeah. Or, in other words, of course, the do nothing is okay. You can just accept the fact that that nothing is happening. But let's say that you want to be in a formal practice situation and you want to be able to, at will, activate and control the direction and intensity of the subjective reactive system. okay, which would be a way of working smart, a way of training where you're in control, so that when the reactive system gets activated in daily life, you sort of trained yourself in ideal situations. Well, what I recommend is that you expose yourself to emotive sounds or emotive sights that activate the system. Sound is the best because you can do it with your eyes closed. It's easy to detect the images. So I usually recommend something like flipping around the TV and then getting things that activate pleasant or unpleasant feel in. You'd be amazed how many images you have if you listen to the soundtrack of a movie. Your mind will just immediately try to see what's going on, okay? And so it activates the whole system. And that way you train yourself to work with the system, and you can have the best of both worlds because you're in a formal practice situation and you're in control of the type, duration, and intensity of the stimulus for this system. So if you come to me and say, I'm not getting a carryover into life, I'm going to ask you, well, have you tried media practice? Have you tried training for life's impacts in stillness? I call that working smart. So at the retreat, if not much activates when we explore this, that's fine, we'll just do the rest of the thing. But there are ways to intentionally activate it, and not necessarily in negative directions either, just all sorts of interesting things can be done. So that's the subjective system, yes?
Can we, while training here for a life situation, can we imagine ourselves in those situations, then that system gets...
I understand. That, the intentional, as a general principle, intentionally controlling this system is only something we do as focus on positive, which will be starting in the afternoon. However, I said as a general principle. People will sometimes ask, well, can I activate it by sort of thinking about a certain something? I would say it's okay to do that occasionally. I wouldn't make that the centerpiece of your practice. Yes?
In terms of feel, you're talking about the emotional body. What's the distinction between a headache and the emotional body, or is that part of the emotional body, or back pain?
Okay, good. That's a good question. The way you know it's an emotional body sensation is by following that little procedure that I just gave you, okay? In other words, if you ask yourself, am I experiencing any emotion? Okay? And then you go to the body and see if any part of that's in the body. That if, in other words, you didn't have an emotion, then an emotion arose. What changed in the body? That's the emotional body sensation. The places to look are reactions. If there's a sound and you're smiling, and you like the sound, that's an emotional sensation in the body. If there's a sound in the environment and you're irritated by the sound, and it's not just mental comment about it, but you actually like have an irritation in the body, that's emotion in the body. In general, I will give you a list of a dozen or so common situations where there is likely to be emotional sensation in your body. Anger. When you experience anger, where do you usually experience it in your body?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I am.
Probably in my throat.
Okay, good. So that's an emotional body sensation. Fear. That's an emotional body sensation. Sadness. That's an emotional body sensation. Joy. That's an emotional body sensation. Enthusiasm, interest. Not sure? Okay. Shame, embarrassment. Okay. You got it. All of those are emotional body sensations. Physical pain? No. That's a physical body sensation. However, if it causes an emotional reaction, then That could happen.
So how do you work with that? Let's say I start to sit, I came in with some physical pain, I start to sit, and then I have emotional reaction to physical pain. It's not something I bring up, it's not something that starts when I sit. Am I making any sense?
Are you asking how to work with the pain or?
Or the emotional reaction to it? Which makes the
Okay,
pain
so
worse.
in other words, let's say that you're doing the feel-in technique, okay? So you are, the instruction is if you have what seems to be emotional body sensation, you focus on. So now the pain, what flavors of emotion does the pain cause you?
Fear.
Fear. Now you're very precise. So now you're going to be aware of the pain is one thing, and the fear reaction to the pain is another thing. You're going to note that as feel in, the fear reaction, that sensation. Then what does note mean? Note means acknowledge and then focus on that sensation. As you focus on that sensation, you attempt to accept that sensation.
This sensation.
Yeah, the fear sensation, the remember I said reactive? So you're looking for the body reacting to the body in this particular case. And then what do you do with it? Just try to make friends with it as best you can. Now, that's only one way to focus, of course. You might want to focus on the mental images triggered by the pain, or the mental talk triggered by the pain. You also might want to focus on the pain itself, or you might want to focus away from the pain onto a restful state. All of these are options. Just be clear which one you're doing. Did that answer your question sufficiently? Okay, excellent. Yes?
I just want to clarify, if we were working with this procedure and we were having a lot of rest in see in and a lot of rest in feel in, we would not be noting that because we're not focusing on the rest.
Well, there's actually 4 procedures on the board, so let's be clear what we're talking about. This is one option, this is another option, this is another option, this is another option. That's clear?
Right.
Okay, good. So if you're doing this, the instruction says if you don't have any activation, note the corresponding restful state. But if you do have an activation, then note the activation. Of course, if you did it for a while and there wasn't any activation, then you might want to switch technique because you're essentially now just noting the restful state, okay? Same thing for here. The instruction said is crystal clear. As long as you're doing this procedure, which could be for 2 minutes or 2 years, however long you want to be doing it. If there's mental talk, you're in. When it disappears, gone. If there's no mental talk, you're rest. And you just do that. And then if it doesn't seem productive, you do something else. Crystal clear?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Yes?
If you're in the rest state and you want to activate more active state, you recommend like like turn on the TV or can you use your can you pretend you're in a traffic jam and
actually that question was just asked a few minutes ago, but I'll answer it again. As in general, you are passive with regards to these things. Okay, you just let them when you do this technique. So you are waiting for activation to occur. If it doesn't occur, then you just note the corresponding restful state. However, if you find that the system hardly activates when you do practice in stillness, and you want to do something to sort of stimulate it so that you can observe it and practice up with it, then I recommend media practice. You listen to a TV or something like that, you get things stirred up. But that would just be a sort of special thing that you would do to help train your skills. Is that clear? As far as intentionally bringing something up, in order to have something to focus on with this, that was asked over here. I said it's okay to do that occasionally, but it's not really the way to do this. Okay? Good. Yes?
Sorry, I had a brain lapse. What does in at the top stand for?
Inner activation.
And FI?
So this technique is see in, hear in, feel in, focus in.
Focusing, all right, thank you.
Focus, as it stands now, when something is prefixed by focus, it means broadly float within that theme or that sensory modality. Otherwise, we see specify the box, see in. Okay, good. Good to go?